In April of 1979, 48 members of the newly formed Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Boulder signed the brand new membership book, the same book new members sign today. As we celebrate the 40th anniversary of that momentous occasion, let's honor the work of our founders, take a look at some of the ways we've changed since then, and appreciate what remains the same. The heart of fellowship life is our Sunday morning gatherings. 40 years ago, the congregation held services just 2 Sundays a month in the various rented spaces we occupied. Those early years of the fellowship were marked by a particularly strong humanist presence in our congregation. By 1987, we held discussion forums on alternate Sundays when there was no service. These were popular with UUs and non-UUs alike. This was the situation when Catherine Harris arrived to serve the UU Fellowship of Boulder in 1993. Within a few years, we'd moved to holding services every week, with the discussion forum following the service twice a month. While the group of members were always loyal to the forums, no one could deny the popularity of services, especially among families with young children. The interim minister who preceded Catherine had started lighting a chalice on Sunday mornings, using a small one that was later used for our children's program. For her installation as minister, Catherine wanted a larger chalice. Claire Seidel had seen a Nambe bowl in Santa Fe that looked like it might do the job, and she and John McMorrin designed the stand that holds it today. Several other cherished traditions started during this time. We began sounding the singing bowl to open the service and started the custom of sharing joys and sorrows, a custom which later became known as Candles of Community. Catherine also introduced the UU Flower Communion tradition to our congregation in 1996. Our first merging of the water service was held on the first Sunday in September of that same year. We began our ministerial intern program in 1997, and 9 intern ministers have enriched our congregation with their wide variety of talents and experience since then. Gradually, we stopped holding forums after moving to our new home in Lafayette, and we began holding 2 services, although we worried, if we have 2 services, whatever will the second service attendees do for coffee? Gladly, we figured it out. Our congregation grew and our Sunday services also evolved. Katie Covey introduced the first bread service, which quickly became a beloved tradition. We've held poetry services, mini retreats, child dedications, animal blessings, no rehearsal Christmas pageants, and services with all sorts of music from a wide variety of traditions, played by members and guest musicians alike. More recently, we began to focus our services and other programming around monthly themes. As our congregation evolved, so did our chalice. Just a few years ago, Reverend Lydia increased the size of the flame to better represent our vibrant congregation. Some things haven't changed, though. Unusual for a congregation our size, we still carry on the tradition of sharing joys and concerns in the service. Our fellowship has always valued the personal connections in our community. As much as we love singing together now, you'd be forgiven if you assumed it had been a part of our services from the beginning. However, it took 12 years after our founding before we acquired our first piano, an upright, in the spring of 1990. Until recently, it sat in the Alcott room and will continue to be used for choir practices. 3 years later, we purchased our first hymnals. During our time at the Masonic Hall, Marcia Pasquet became our first music coordinator and was instrumental and persistent in growing a fledgling music program into a choir. Later, as our music budget grew, we added professional musicians to our services. Eventually, Marlis Brinkman took the reins of the program and shaped the struggling small choir into a robust vocal ensemble. Since a piano worthy of the new space was not in the budget when we bought our new building, Julie Morris and Marcia Pasquet organized music lovers in the congregation to raise funds for a grand piano, and their names were displayed on a plaque near the dais. Many pianists over the years lent their talents to bring out the beauty of that instrument, including Sam Welsh, Julie Morris, Carmen Sandom, and our current music director, Tad Koryath. Music wasn't limited to Sunday mornings. Over the years, the Sanctuary has hosted special events, concert series, benefits, and coffee houses. The Sweet Noise Coffee House was held monthly on Sunday afternoons for several years and featured the folk and rock sounds of the Acoustics, as well as other local musicians, poets, and storytellers. As we know, music draws people close, and the choir has developed into a significant subcommunity in our congregation. They went through a particularly difficult time when Marlis, their beloved leader, was diagnosed and eventually passed away from cancer in 2013. She led them with vigor and gusto until the very end, but it was a very sad time. It was exciting then when Melissa Williams took leadership and our choir grew to the point that it started to spawn spin-offs, including One Voice and even for a while a children's choir. When she too was diagnosed with cancer the next year, our collective hearts almost broke. As Melissa stepped away to focus on healing, Clellan Brown came in as interim fellowship choir director. Members, including Deborah Mensch and Clara Kelly, helped to lead the vocal groups as we worked to hire and retain a permanent music director. Today, under the dynamic leadership of our current music director, Tad Koryath, the choir grew to over 30 members. Sunday services regularly feature the choir, the band, and classical music Sundays, as well as a wide variety of guest musicians. We know that there's a lot more to Sunday mornings than our services with its beautiful music. Our religious education program attracts people of all ages. 40 years ago, there weren't many children in our congregation, but Elizabeth Robinson was one of those kids. She remembers going to Sunday school at the Carriage House while the adults met in the Physicians Building around 1962. She would walk over while the adults were finishing service to grab goodies from the coffee hour in the time-honored tradition of UU Kids Everywhere. Beginning in the late 1980s, we occasionally hired part-time religious education staff as families with young children began to come. In the year 2000, the congregation took a giant leap into professional RE leadership by hiring Katie Covey, who ran our RE program for 16 years. Kathy Partridge's girls and the Atanos daughters were some of the kids who attended during this time. The move eastward to Lafayette attracted even more families with young children. Our new building allowed the RE program to set roots and spread their wings as we enjoyed the permanent classroom space and built an outdoor play area a couple years later. Soon after that, we had our first week-long summer day camp, which continues to this day as a cornerstone event for young people in our fellowship. Katie would say that relationships are formed at summer camp and maintained on Sunday mornings. 10 years later, it had grown to about 50 campers and 25 youth counselors. Congregational volunteers offered stories, science lessons, service projects, meditation, music, art, and poetry, among other things. Some favorite camp traditions included junk sculptures, the zoo room, a bouncy castle, and water slide. By 2009, the RE program had tripled in size and attracted families with children of all ages, added a preschool, multiple classes, and a vibrant youth program. And our focus expanded. Working with the Sienna Project, we raised $40,000 through bake sales, chili cook-offs, and other fundraising efforts, and in 2011 sent 18 youth and adults to Guatemala for a week to help build schools in the areas that had been ravaged by hurricanes. Keeping youth involved in church activities is a problem for many congregations, ours included. Today, we jointly coordinate our youth program with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. Together, we offer 4 levels of OWL, coming of age, and our youth participate together in regional activities like the 9th grade trip, quarterly weekend gatherings called cons, and week-long overnight summer quest camps. Before she left 3 years ago, Katie spearheaded the transformation of our religious education program from a traditional Sunday school model with age-segregated classrooms taught by parent volunteers into the cutting-edge model School of the Spirit, featuring holistic programming for people of all ages. Today, Spencer and Chris create engaging spirit jams. Miss Ari provides a warm, supportive atmosphere in our preschool room, and Ellen Saunders Duncan serves as both RE and youth coordinator as we are in the final stages of hiring a new director of lifespan faith formation. It is an exciting time in the RE world. Throughout the history of our fellowship, people have always worked to create a better world, but the nature of the work has evolved. Efforts to support the most vulnerable in our community began in the 1980s and continues today. The Social Concerns Committee at that time began the Mitten Tree tradition and our long-standing support for EFA, BCAP, Crop Walk, the Homeless Shelter, and other work. During these years, much of our giving to these and other worthy causes was funneled through the Gilbert Fund, which served as a grant program generously funded by members of the fellowship. Longtime members will remember Paul Winston's letter-writing table, which was a fixture of our time at the Masonic Hall. In the 1980s, members of our congregation sponsored Salvadoran refugees and sheltered them in their homes as they sought a permanent home. We became a welcoming congregation in 2000, a process that involved at least 2 all-congregation conversations where we met in a big circle to talk about what it meant to take that step and how people felt about it. In the end, the vote was nearly unanimous. Since then, our congregation stood on the side of love at the Capitol in Denver, where our presence at Pride celebrations supported trans youth, marriage equality, and in other ways worked to create a world where those of us who are LGBTQ can live and love as we choose. Our interest in doing more social justice grew with the move to East County, and it influenced our ministerial search. Lydia's community organizing background was seen as particularly attractive to us at that time. Once she became minister, and with her encouragement, the fellowship joined the Interfaith Organizing Network Together Colorado in 2009. BV Can's work with that organization has included helping local families and children access public health insurance and advocating for better mental health treatment and access. Despite our fear, we leaned into generosity in the Great Recession and started giving half of our offering plate away to community organizations nominated by members whose work was in alignment with our UU values. Since its inception in 2011, we have donated well over $100,000 to dozens of organizations in our community through the Half Plate collections. Led by Diane Ladd and other members who were supporters of the I Have a Dream Foundation, in 2012 we made a 10-year commitment to support a dreamer in the Phoenix class. In doing so, we became the first faith community to ever sponsor a dreamer in the program. This decision represented a significant commitment to the local community in East Boulder County, and making such a long-term financial commitment was a landmark in our journey to become a program-level church. Prior to 2015, our racial justice work had largely been limited to participating in MLK Day events. Following an especially inspiring sermon Reverend Lydia preached on the new Jim Crow in 2015, Lisa Kahn and Katie Wiley, among others, organized themselves into the Racial Justice Community and began to host book discussions and film presentations, supported the White Supremacy Teach-In, and spearheaded the placement of a Black Lives Matter banner on the outside of our building, which we replaced several times when it was stolen. After the powerful UU General Assembly in Phoenix, Arizona that focused on immigration justice, several fellowship members came together in 2012 to educate the congregation about the plight of undocumented immigrants and actively engage in justice work for immigrants. The Immigration Task Force partnered with the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, CIRC, and other organizations to care for immigrants and their families and to change legislation. Recently, members of our congregation have been engaged with efforts to develop right relationships with the original inhabitants of this land, the Arapaho people. And the Eco-Justice Group explores issues around climate change and living in a sustainable way on our planet. Often when the history of a church is told, the story is all about buildings and ministers. As you can see, our fellowship is so much more than that. We were a nomadic but still vibrant congregation in the years after we left the Boulder Church 40 years ago. It took many years to find a home of our own, decide to buy it, and then figure out how to pay for it. We soon were holding 2 services in our new building. We improved the interior of our building with beautiful wall hangings, stained glass installations, and artistic depictions of our 7 principles, and the exterior with barns and sheds, new playgrounds and gardens, and tried our best to keep the weeds and the prairie dogs at bay. Conversations about when and how we might expand our building became more common until eventually, with the election of 2016, we had an influx of visitors and could no longer put it off. A generous anonymous donation of $1 million spurred us into action. A building committee was established to examine possibilities for accommodating the growth, and it was determined that expansion and extensive remodeling of our current building in Lafayette made the most sense of our available options. After raising money and more money, and then deciding to fire the first builder and raise even more money, construction began in February of 2019. We hope to move into our new building by the fall. If you've driven by the construction site that is our former home, you may have been shocked by how flimsy and empty the shell of the building seems. What makes us who we are is not the building, but what happens within that building. More than anything, we are a community bound by caring, and potlucks, because some things never change. We still gather in covenant groups and book groups. Humanists still are an important presence here. Circle suppers became 6 at 6 dinners, but are nonetheless tasty. The caring committee became neighborhood connectors. We added our Longmont UU presence 3 years ago and our lay pastoral care associates program in 2017. Things may have grown and gotten more sophisticated, but at the core, we are still bringing meals and giving rides. We come together to celebrate babies and marriages and gather to comfort one another and honor those who have died. Over the last 40 years, our vision and mission have both expanded and come into better focus. It was in 1987 that we chose our vision, bringing love and reason to life. But it wasn't until 2009, 22 years later, that we added building a just and compassionate world. That same year, we set a strategic plan in motion called Searching for Our Future. Searching sometimes takes a while. In 2016, we went through a vision process as a congregation in which we clarified and embraced our strategic direction as one of inner depth and outer focus. Together, we set a goal to create a center for spiritual exploration and justice making. And last year, we committed millions of dollars to that vision to make room for our future, a future that we are building together. We are so very grateful to our founders, to our staff who have supported our work so capably, and our ministers who have guided us through the process from being a small fledgling group of 48 brave souls to a pastoral-sized fellowship to the energetic program-sized congregation with over 300 members we are today.